What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the My Friend's Basement Studio podcast. This is a podcast where us at My Friend's Basement Studio talk about our business as well as podcasting tips, technical tips, all sorts of stuff you should know for your own podcasts and creations. I'm Maxim.
I'm Connor.
And this is his basement.
Yes, it is. I'm the friend here.
No, I'm the friend. Oh, yeah, you are the
I'm
friend.
everyone's friend. Yeah, I'm the
That's
friend
true.
in my friend's basement. But this episode, we've been talking about, I guess, over the last couple episodes, trying to change it up, trying to answer more questions.
Yep.
This episode, we will be talking about how to get the most out of podcasting with friends, comedy podcasting more specifically, because we have a lot of shows that come in here that want to just riff, ramble, and then are surprised when it's not a massive success.
We should call them riffing and rambling pods.
Yeah.
But yeah, guys, if you're tuning in from previous episodes, we're doing you may know we do our lessons learned and our tech tip at the beginning. We're moving that towards the end. We're going to get right into the content to answer some questions.
Yes, and before we get into talking about how to get the most out of a comedy podcast, friend podcast, Chumcast, riffing and rambling podcast, whatever the name you call it is, we spent some time looking for it. There's not a one name, but we had let's answer a question from Reddit that you had, the headphone one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Real
quick.
Go ahead.
Before we get into this, if you got any questions you want answered about podcasting, creating podcasts, do whatever we do here, whatever you're seeing on screen, ask any question you have about it and send it to myfriendsbasementstudio@gmail.com and just say question for the pod. We'll answer. We'd love to answer it.
You can also comment on the YouTube video. And then if you want to just say you're listening, we have a Reddit going on our account. You can message us there, message us on Instagram, or just like put a question in the podcasting subreddit. We're starting to go through there to find them. Yeah. And that's where we found this question.
The question was, how do podcasters without headphones get so good at it?
Which is such a lovely question.
Yeah.
I really think for this person, what you want to think about is, are you controlling the setup?
Yeah.
What is your setup like? How much do you trust it? And how much do you trust yourself? Because we started with headphones, right?
Yeah, I guess first off in their question, when they say, how do they get so good at it? What do you think they mean by good at it? Good at what?
Good at hearing.
I think it's good at just like checking your levels and staying on the mic, because I think what they were talking about.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's making sure like breathing and stuff. I'm guessing this person's equipment is not the same as ours, where like, and their editing isn't as good as what other people can do, because that's where you start to notice those things. You're more self-conscious at the beginning too.
Totally.
But like these microphones, you're not gonna. And the equipment we have, you're not going to have as many issues. Things aren't going to crap out on you. You're not going to like, I'll move this arm. There's no noise that is being changed. We don't need to check as much because our setup is good. So that's one thing.
Right. I'd say also the second thing is like you mentioned earlier, we started with headphones. So a big thing we notice is like over the time you do a podcast, you get better at your own mic control. Yeah. Especially if you're using headphones, because when you do a podcast with headphones, you have that instant feedback of your voice and you learn just to be on it all the time, right? Like no matter how I turn my head, I'm always keeping my mouth in this like region, because that's how you get the most level response, loud and clear. So how do podcasters without headphones get good at it? One, they either podcasted with headphones for some time and they understand how their microphone works. Or two, they're in probably a studio that has nice equipment and they got people to compensate for the fact they keep going off mic and doing stuff like this. You know?
Yeah. I mean, we here just going after it. There's no headphones, but we spent enough time back there to trust our equipment. Yeah. And that's a big thing where it's like, if we didn't, I think we'd probably wear headphones.
Another thing to be aware of is the headphone volume knob and the gain knob from the microphone are two different things, okay?
Not the same.
Just because it sounds great in the headphones does not mean it's going to sound great on the recording. You might have your headphone volume way up and your gain way down. You might even have your gain way up and your headphones way down. So play around with it. The only way to actually know is to check the levels on your recorder or on your audio interface, whatever it may be, and just make sure you're coming in yellow.
I
negative 12 dB.
Yeah, I got a tech tip based off that, but we'll do our tech tip at the end.
Cool. Do you like candles? Do you like small businesses?
I thought you said, do you light candles?
Do you light candles? Do you like candles? Well, guys, here at My Friend's Basement Studio, we really like these candles.
Show them how much we burnt.
We've burnt a lot of this. But this is from another small business just here in the area in Brooklyn, New York. This is from Knows Best. Knows Best has 100% soy wax candles. They have fun names like Mountain Daddy or Send Nudes or our studio favorite Bitch Goddess.
Yes.
But yeah, guys, they have each candle comes with a curated Spotify playlist and a cocktail recipe. But the big news here, guys, is we now have an affiliate link with them. So you buy candles through them, through our affiliate link, we get some money back. You're supporting 2 small businesses in one, and you can make your house smell good.
Yeah, so to use the affiliate link is going to be in the description of all our shows, whether you're listening on Spotify, elsewhere, or watching on YouTube. You can support Knows Best by buying their incredible candles, and when you do, you support us by using that affiliate link, and they're good people. If you swing by their store, you can actually see them pour the candles right there.
Very cool.
So, and I go in and I talk with them like every other week.
Connor buys candles all the time because every time he gets dumped, he needs something to cry over.
And boy, do I have a lot of candles.
And boy, does he have a lot of candles. But yeah, guys, check them out. Buy through the affiliate link. Go check out Knows Best. I actually got my mom a set of these for Christmas, and I got all the ones without the dirty names because I did want to support a local business, but I didn't want to give my mom a candle that says Send Nudes. But they're great. These are awesome, guys. Go check it out. Hit that affiliate link. Buy a candle or 2.
So let's get into our subject, which is it's going to be 10 tips for comedy or for podcasting with your friends.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe what these podcasts are because broadly they fall under the comedy podcast umbrella, but they don't really have a lot of structure a lot of times. It's kind of just like you and your friend group have decided to start a podcast. It could be 3 of you, it could be 4 of you, and you're like, let's just fuck around and be funny.
And
you know,
we did some research beforehand. Like we said, we're starting to go on Reddit. I've been watching YouTube videos, finding questions, and that's where we're sourcing a lot of these things. But this topic isn't one that's widely talked about, or we couldn't find it through an easy search because of the naming thing that we've already alluded to. But I feel like this is where most podcasts sit. 2 people have an idea. They decide they want to start a podcast, and then they just go with it.
Yeah.
And those are the podcasts that make up most of the failed under 10 episode podcasts.
Yeah.
And so we're here to help provide some tips to try and get you over that hump to make it a little bit more successful. Yeah. And we got sticky notes for it this time. It's a real show.
Tip number 1, get new friends.
If your friend tells you to podcast, drop them.
Yeah. Get them out of here. No, so yeah, I almost think we would be missing an opportunity to not name these podcasts officially for future reference, but we call them like Chum Podcast typically.
And that's actually a phrase from my teacher back in my senior year at the University of Oregon, but he's from England. And so Chumcast, I don't know if it was a thing that was said over there or a thing in general or more of a phrase that isn't as familiar in the US, but Chumcast is a fine word for it. If you Google Chumcast, there's a podcast called Chumcast. That's not what we're talking about. Exactly. We're not critiquing them, but it's not going to come in on the mic.
There's an alarm outside. Yeah. But yeah, when you think about these podcasts, like a lot of the major comedian podcasts are in this genre, right?
Yeah.
Like you have Tiger Belly is one of these, Bad Friends. You have Bert Kreischer and
Two Bears, One Cave. Your Mom's House. Anything under the Your Mom's House studio.
Because they're just hanging out. They're just shooting the shit. So the key to these is mostly be famous.
That's not an official tip that we're giving you. But if you are famous,
it's much easier.
It is so much easier.
So let's get into it. What do we got for our first tip?
So our first one is have a proper intro.
That's tip number 1, proper intro.
That's something that a lot of people will gloss over. And we've had people a few times come in here and just start rolling, or they have a few ideas, but they don't really go through what the show is. They don't really lay it out. And remember, if you're working in audio, the intro not only needs to be what the show is, the roadmap and the value proposition up top, but also who's on the other mic. We do a lot of video podcasting here, but if your audience is just listening to audio and you never say the name of the other person on the podcast, whether it's your co-host or guest, they're gonna be like, your audience is gonna be wondering who is talking.
Right. And I think in a lot of these Chum podcasts, right, there might be a cold open, there might not be much of an intro. And it's just at like the beginning of this episode that you're watching right now. Like this is kind of a Chum podcast, but with technical direction, right?
Yeah.
But we open up, I do this for all my podcasts, say the name of the show, kind of give like maybe some like overview type stuff, and then who we are.
Yeah.
And I think when you do these Chum podcasts, right, if you got 3 friends on mics, 4 friends, it can help you to be like, oh, I'm so-and-so. Maybe you give a brief introduction or like, hey guys, welcome to this show. Like we're just hanging out here and we're just like talking shit about our weeks or whatever. And then you can say who you are, your name, maybe a little bit about yourself, just so people can identify your voice with a certain person.
Yeah, I think that's a good place. We can roll into tip 2, which is have a structure.
Have a structure.
And I think this bleeds into the intro, because a lot of times when you have a podcast idea with your friends, you understand it, your friend understands it, but the ability to communicate it with an audience isn't great. It's why inside jokes fall flat when you tell other people. They don't have the context, they don't have the premise around it. So you need some type of structure.
And when we say structure, this is not like you need to have segments and like game show pieces or anything like this. Like literally what's nice about structure is it's almost like adding salt to like a soup. I think about it, you know, it's like, even like if you just have like soup with no salt, it's like, all right, but even if you add just one little tiny pinch of salt into it, it's suddenly better. So when you're going through these Chum podcasts, right, you're hanging out, you're shooting the shit, you're riffing with your friends. If you have something you can go back to when the air is dead or whatever, that will help a lot. You know, when it's like, if you're doing a podcast, like let's say you and your friends from your fantasy football league want to start a podcast together, you can always fall back on like that. Be like, oh, we play fantasy football together, and like we're talking about this, what happened this week. Whenever one of your riffs dies down, one of you can then pick it up and be like, okay, yeah, so you drafted, you have this player. What do you think about that this week? You know, small details.
And I think Common Enemies by Matt Hansel, who records here, is a great show to look at for having structure. Basically, his podcast has 3 elements, or an intro that he records afterwards and throws in where he summarizes what was talked about in the show. But so he has the intro, and then first part is the common subject that everyone on the podcast can talk about, can relate to. And then the third is a debate, the enemies part. And it's just three segments. It doesn't always need to be segments, but it's very clear and it's very loose within that. But it's like, clearly we talk about this, and that's the podcast. And it's not just, there's so much riffing going on, but it's not aimless riffing.
Right. That's the big thing is, you know, the aimless riffing, when that aimless riffing comes to a close, you might still have 30 minutes to go and you'll not know what to talk about. But if you have a structure, an idea that's your through line, you can always fall back on that. Like my interview podcast, Don't Quit Your Day Job. It's obviously an interview podcast, but I want to learn about people's creative journey and how they started what they do to where they are today with comedy or photography, music, whatever it may be. So if we start riffing and get off track, once that's done, I can then just be like, okay, and then what happened next? You know?
Yeah. It's a great segue to go into, we're talking about structure. How do you find it? Third tip, have a niche.
Have a niche.
Have a niche, because the niche is what's going to provide ideas for the structure. A niche, a great way to think about a show without a niche, starting a podcast with your friends without a niche, is like trying to write something and the paper is blank. It's so much harder to do that than when you have a premise.
Yep.
So, I mean, a lot of Chumcast will have some type of loose premise, but you may think, but I'm actually thinking about the people that are coming in here. They're just like, oh, I'm a comedian, therefore I'm funny and want to just riff. And we often tell them, have a niche, have a thing. Something.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of like the non-comedian will more than likely than not start with the idea, start with the niche.
Even comedians do need something, you know? Like until you have a following, you can't just rely on like, I'm funny, people will listen. You have to have a thing that people are wanting to hear your perspective on.
Absolutely.
As well.
And there are examples of successful shows without niches.
Right.
And there's some celebrity aspect, but you think of like Come Town, it was more like anti-PC culture. I'm not super familiar with it, but people reference it a lot.
It was like a moment. Like there was a special sauce moment where they distilled something and made it, and it just shot right through.
More power to you, but when people look at that and go, I want to do that, you're looking at the exception and not the rule.
Not the rule.
And it could happen to you if you want to roll the dice, but we're here to tell you, we've worked with enough podcasts that it's not more likely than not that will not happen for you.
Yeah.
And if it does, great. We'd love to be a part of it. But if you're wondering why after 8 episodes, your niche-less podcast hasn't gone anywhere, then it may be because you don't even know who your what audience you're trying to serve.
And we've talked about this before on this show, is like when you don't have a niche, you don't have an audience. Unless you already have a fan base or something. Like once you have a niche, you have an audience, you know?
Yeah.
The example I mentioned earlier, you know, like a fantasy football podcast. If you're a fan of a team, you can just market it to their fans, you know? Like my anime podcast, right? Just find the fans of that anime where they hang out online, market right to them. You pick your niche and you go with it. You want to start a podcast for you and your buddy who do woodworking together, like make a podcast about that. Boom, you got the wood glue to hold the whole show together. Bring in the audience, you know? So have a niche. And it can be even like broad, like whatever you can. I know it, like you'll see this tip in a lot of like podcasting videos, just like find an audience, find a niche.
Yeah.
And what you got to understand is it truly doesn't matter what that is. It can be big, it can be small. Like the narrower it is, the easier it is going to be to connect directly with your audience. The broader it is, the more difficult. But like find the niche somewhere. Find a specific thing. And like when you're just hanging on these chum podcasts, you might want to keep it more broad. You know, maybe you and your friends all love like horror movies or something. Boom. You watch a horror movie every week, you riff for the rest of the show. Do what you got to do.
So basically you have the niche, which will help you get a structure, which will help you really outline the intro if you're recording for the first time.
Right.
But with all of those elements, really what you want to do, and this is tip number 4, is lean into your value and lean into your structure.
Yes.
So you have it. Own the structure. You have the structure, and now you should really just be like, this is what I'm doing. Because it's kind of, even if you think about comedians, when they they hate or they really love a topic, it's funny. It's relatable. We all have those things that just tickle us in a certain way and make us react. So lean into the structure that you have.
Yes.
And then lean into the value of the show is a bigger thing. And the value, if you're a comedian, could be the comedic ability within the structure or your unique voice. It's really empowering yourself to be the best version of yourself talking about this subject.
Yes. And a great example of this is our show, S&D, the S&D podcast. The show is 1 hour. They used to be like 30 to 40 minutes of talking up top, hanging out, and then they would do a prank call or 2 at the end. Now they've flipped it the other way, where they do probably 15 minutes of talking at the top and then just 45 minutes of prank calls with their guests, because that's the game of the show. They found that to be the most fun part. It delivers the most laughs. They leaned into it, and it's paying off.
And that's, so if you're going even wider, and I think we're going to talk about the value of podcasts, of certain types of podcasts later on, but just to kind of gloss over it, the value of a comedy podcast, or like these Chumcasts, is usually entertainment value.
Yeah.
So if you're a comedian coming to us and you're thinking about your structure, your niche, at the end of the day too, you want to think about how entertaining, how much entertainment can I squeeze into every second of that podcast?
Exactly.
The celebrity piece is like the kind of when you can get away with it, because there's informational, educational values. Like, how did you become famous? You're thinking you might learn how to become a celebrity, but really, if you're you're starting out with friends, you just lean into the entertainment value. And
like for this show, right, there is some, like, this is one where we kind of flip, where we kind of have like we're leaned into more educational value, and then the entertainment value is more secondary. But obviously, this is not chopped down into a 10-minute video. So this is still kind of a hangout entertainment value podcast.
Yes. Tip number 5. Make sure your structure, your niche, your theme is repetitive enough.
Yep.
Now, what does repetitive enough mean? It means you're not going to get bored. You're not going to get bored doing it over and over and over again, but it's also not so repetitive that it's the same show every time.
Yeah. And that might be like if you have 2 normal hosts and you have a topic you talk about every week, if you have 2 regular hosts, then you swap out a guest every week. Easy way to have it be repetitive, roughly the same show, add new perspective in every week, right?
Yeah.
If it's just you 2 and you come back, or you 3 and you stay there for every episode and you're always talking about one specific thing that happened to you, or like you guys keep bringing up the same stories or something like that, it will get old, not only for you, the recorder, but also for the listener. So have the structure play to repetition, basically.
Worthless Clowns is a perfect example for this, where they talk, the theme is like, we're all stupid, let's laugh about it.
Yeah, so they have the 2 co-hosts, and every week they each share just an embarrassing story from their lives, and they read off like basically like an Am I the Asshole from Reddit, and they laugh at these stupid people.
And then every once in a while, they have a guest who brings their own unique stories, so that way Brittany and Allie aren't always having to come up with stories every time they record.
Right.
Add some new flavor to it. But it's the same formula every show, but with a new addition. And then when you actually think about, let's talk about this tip 6 next, because it kind of fits.
Okay.
I think it's jumping ahead if you're thinking about structuring it. But I think the tip number 6, having clips for your show, thinking about the stuff you want to put out for social media. And the reason this is relevant with repetitive enough is if you scroll through really popular TikTok feeds or TikTok profiles, same with Instagram, you'll see their content is very similar every single post.
Yep.
And so basically social media is now training people to expect the same things from certain accounts.
Yes.
And if it varies too much, it's not going to do as well. That's why this tip will go at number 6, not later down on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it's dude, the amount of people, it's so fascinating on TikTok, seeing someone on TikTok who does a funny thing, goes semi-viral for it, and then just has to do that same thing forever. And anytime they stray off that, no likes, no views.
Yes.
It's brutal.
It's tough. And it used to be TikTok was like you just repost the video that went viral and then it'll go viral again and go viral again until you grow a following.
Yeah.
They don't promote that as much anymore. But that's why it started to be repetitive.
Yeah.
But why else are clips important?
Okay, so tip number 6 is clips.
Yes.
Tip number 6, make clips. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. When you pick your niche, you're somewhere on the pyramid of broad to narrow. I don't know why it's upside down. It can be whichever way you want. There's a narrow audience to broad audience, okay? The closer you are to the top of the pyramid at narrow audience, the less likely you are actually going to need a clip, because if you have a very narrow audience where you're very into the specific thing, you can go, where those people meet, where those communities are online. You can just market directly to there, and those people will come to you. On the flip side of the pyramid, the broad side, general audience, when you have a less specific niche, you need to bring people in. And the way you're going to bring people in a very broad sense, is you're going to go to where most people are online. And that right now is TikTok or Instagram Reels, right? So when you post clips from your show, that's going to be the determining factor on if people are going to listen to you over another podcast. Because at the end of the day, these chum podcasts, they're a dime a dozen. They're everywhere, And what's going to set you apart is making good, funny clips, picking out the funniest moments, putting out a clip every week, because you're going to see these clips over and over and over. And eventually you're going to be like, okay, I'll listen to that show, I like these clips every time I see them. I'm going to listen,
And that's exactly why you lean into the value you bring to your show, the entertainment value. If you have, if you're a dime a dozen, but you're on the funnier side of that dozen, I don't know if that's how that works in that, but if you're on the funnier side, you're going to gain more attention, and you think about your funnel of viewership. it's going to attract more people to your longer form podcast.
Yeah. That being said, there was for a long, this is a small clip tip. Always make the clips vertical. Like we used to be, remember the internet forever when people first started getting camera phones, everyone was like record horizontally because we all watch stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
When you shoot a podcast, right, this is going on YouTube. It's horizontal.
Yeah.
When we make a clip from this, it's going to be vertical and we're just going to have to pan it back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's just what it is. Make it fit the screen and just make the clip look nice. If the content is there, you just need a little bit extra legwork to make sure the quality of the clip is good, and you'll have something great that you're happy with.
Yeah. Yeah. We should talk more about clips and stuff more in depth on a new episode.
Mm-hmm.
But I think let's go back. Let's open up the pyramid back up with this tip number 7. Prepare. I mean, it sounds so stupid, right? Because the idea of a Chumcast is you're just having fun with your friends. You're shooting the shit. And yes, I would still say Chumcast comedy podcasts, riffing and rambling, whatever you want to call it, is still probably the easiest structure. So many podcasts outside of the comedy genre are scripted. You think of Serial, This American Life, and pretty much most podcasts, maybe outside of sports is another category where it's probably not, are highly scripted. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to put in the work. And so because of the democratization of podcasting, the ability to make it so easily, which we've talked about in the value of podcasting episode, people will think, well, it's easy to do, therefore I just show up and I record.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do that to an extent, but come in with some preparation. Like, again, let's go back to Worthless Clowns or S&D. I'll talk about Worthless Clowns and their preparation.
Okay.
Even though it's a Chumcast, they talk about, they have their stories prepped before they come on, and they have the Am I the Asshole clip picked out. They're not trying to figure it out on air or scrolling around. It's prepared. It's not a ton, but it's enough to make sure their show is going to be quality.
Yep. And same thing with the S&D, right? I mean, they obviously have a mechanical element to it, which is prank calls, which they do need to be prepared for. But you can't, like, if they cold called numbers like live on the show, there's a lot of them you get trapped in a phone maze. So David and Sean beforehand will call the numbers they have in mind and make sure they can get to a real person in a set amount of time before they do it here.
Yes.
You know, and there's always like, come up with a prank call idea before. Like I've been on their show 2 times, and I was like, I like thought of it like before recording. I was like, okay, here's who I think I'm going to call this person, try to do this, you know? Yeah. And granted, it can go a little off the rails when they're actually in the moment, but they are preparing. And I want to use another example that for a huge podcast, right? Tiger Belly with Bobby Lee and Kalila. So when they first started, they didn't know the structure of what they were going to do or how the structure was going to work. And like literally they would just, as the week led up to recording, they would just make notes of all these like celebrity news and world news or like pop culture things that were happening. So when they sat down to record, they could check in with each other about their week. And then they could just go into like, oh, did you guys see this happened? And then they could discuss the topics. And that's a very loose structure, but it is a structure, is having topics ready to talk about, you know?
And being prepared.
Yeah.
It's important. So that's tip 7. Tip 8 fits underneath prepared, which is set guest expectations and limits.
Yes, this is a good one. When you ask someone to be on your podcast, you should be clear about what it is and what they need to do. And I will say, so for my podcast, Don't Quit Your Day Job, I interview a lot of creatives and stuff. And if I'm familiar with them and they already know the podcast, I just ask them to be on. If I'm not familiar with them or they don't really know me, I'll say, hey, so-and-so, I have a podcast, and I link it called Don't Quit Your Day Job, where I interview people about their creative passions. Would you like to come on it this Saturday at noon? Blah, 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 whatever. And they'll be like, okay, yeah. And a lot of times they ask, hey, is there any questions that I should be ready for? And I tell them, like, oh, no, but it's a loose 90-minute interview. I'll just ask questions in the moment. And people are fine with that. Other types of interview podcasts, they'll have like questions pre-sent over, like consider these things, right? And what we're talking about for Chumcast, right, is when you have someone on, if you're farting around, like you got to give people some expectation. A lot of times you can't count on them to listen to your podcast before they're the guest on it, even though people really should. Podcast guest etiquette. Listen to an episode before you get on it.
Yeah.
But
even on the way over.
Yeah. And it's figure out the tone of the podcast. You know, if the podcast is a bit cleaner, more low key, don't be super aggressive and don't come in. And also, this kind of falls under it as well as like the boundaries. Is like if the show's tone is here, don't be the guest who like crosses the boundary, or communicate kind of where the tone of the show is to the people before they come on. You don't want to have to scrap an episode, basically.
Yeah, and those are the limitations. I also think I've seen recordings because of lack of preparation or expectation. Like it was so loose where it just went off the rail.
Yeah.
And their subject wasn't talked about at all.
Yep.
And, you know, if you're just riffing a lot, that can be, if people don't have expectations or limits to the riffs, then it can just get derailed very, very quickly, which is tip number 9. Stay on the rails.
Stay on them rails.
It's like there's nothing worse than recording a podcast and then immediately going, well, that will never be published.
Yeah.
Like that was a way, especially when people record here, I mean, people pay to record here.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of money, but still we're working with people that usually do things independently on their own. And if they have paid and they're like, well, we didn't even touch our topic at all, then it's just kind of a waste.
Yeah.
A waste of time, a waste of money. Not to say in the big picture of things, you can always learn something from that. You can learn where the weakness and strengths are of certain things or find something new. But if it goes completely off the rails and say you don't talk about a subject, or it's like a subject you should not have touched at all.
Yep.
Then you just waste your time.
Yeah, so don't do that. And following with that, I would also say is if you're not recording in a studio that gives you a time limit, know a time limit ahead of time.
Yeah.
Be like, listen, guys, this show we record for 45 minutes. Let's do 5 minutes of top of this. When we get down to the last 5, we just got to get out and say these bits. But like, let's keep it contained.
Stay on the rails with time. Yeah, and I think we work with a lot of comedians. A piece of advice that I've gotten in comedy that I think that I've told people when podcasting is, if you have 35 minutes of good podcast, don't do 50 minutes of podcasting. It's the same if you have a really good, if someone gives you 10 minutes and you have a really good 8 minutes and you don't think that the last 2 are going to be good, it's okay to do 8.
Yeah.
It's put on a good performance. Podcast is the same way, but like
if at any point during your podcast you say, what else should we talk about, you should have ended it right there. It's over. And it's like with studio time, right? With studio time, it's like people are paying us, right? They're paying for a full hour, so sometimes they feel like they need to record for a full 50. You can just record for 30. You don't have to do that. You like when you decide what your show is, you should figure out the length that works for you and you should stick to it.
Yes.
I record my interview podcast is about an hour and a half. I like hitting 90 minutes exactly because I feel like people open up around minute 40 and we can really get the ball rolling. And then usually by an hour and a half, we're both kind of like, all right, like we got everything. We're good. If it goes longer, that's amazing. But usually that's kind of the wind down point. Similarly with my Gundam podcast, that one is kind of, we just record however long we need to. But that one is between 45 to an hour and 15, depending on the episode and the complexity of the story. But
but there's a script. So you have a lot of notes. Yeah. That's the preparation that goes into it.
So much script. Okay. Like literally my co-host Alex, he watches the episode and he makes notes of some things that stand out. I go scene by scene, almost line by line to capture what's happening. And that's the structure. That's the backbone of the episode, as I say, what's happening, what happens in the scene, and then we like riff about it, make jokes about it, and then we move on to the next piece.
Yeah.
A lot of preparation for that.
Yeah.
But it's also like, you're like, how hard can that be? It's like, oh yeah, I got to spend, an hour and a half every week watching a show that I'm going to watch anyway.
But that's a Chumcast still.
Yeah.
It's you and a friend talking about a TV show, but it takes preparation. There's expectations. Like everything we've talked about in these tips you've applied to the show.
Exactly.
And it's doing very well now.
And granted, I mean, when we started Small Town Radio, which was a research Chumcast, right?
Yeah.
We had issues with time for a while. We couldn't figure out how long the show should be and how on the rails. And like the format went through a lot of iterations, and that show is dead now. But not for those reasons. We actually, after a lot of discussions, I'll throw this in as a secondary tip.
Yeah.
Communicate with the people who are on the podcast and say, like, get an idea of like what's working, what's not working, feel it out, do a couple practice episodes, see what you like, what you don't like, I
mean, that's a great thing to reference our video on picking partners in business, in podcasting. It's all the same. We wrote 11 tips.
We wrote 11. Fuck.
I know, but no, I knew we wrote 11.
Oh,
but I think this one,
yeah.
There's two. We've talked about guest etiquette quite a bit.
We should actually cut this one into the beginning where we say 10 tips. We should go 11 and then.
No, I mean, we can mention it. I think this was going to be a mention. It's not going to be a full tip.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about guests a lot. And I feel like this last one is going to be a better ending.
Okay.
But give and take space when you have a guest on.
Give and take space. Big tip.
Big unnumbered tip.
Big
a bonus.
Unnumbered tip.
You watch our tip videos and you get more than you bargained for.
Dude.
But basically, if you don't have a good banter already established, we've podcasted together for a while. There's kind of a natural give and take. If you're new to it and you're the talkative friend, give space. If you're the quieter friend, take space. It just needs to be balanced because if you introduce someone and it's a guest and not even a co-host and they don't talk the whole time, what's the point of them being there?
Yeah, I would say especially for the podcast where it's you and your buddies hanging out, like if it's 3 of you every episode and it's the same and you all kind of just talk and you make it work, great. If you are 2 people, let's say, and you have a guest, I do this on my interview podcasts. There's certain guests I click with more than others, and sometimes you don't match up in your conversational style, but your guest, you have the guest on, this is their moment to be on your show. You want to give as much space for them to take and to be present as possible. And one thing I like to do in like group podcast situations, and I notice this even when I guest on other people's podcasts, is I will ask specifically directed questions at people that have not talked for a while. And that's kind of an aggressive move.
No, I do that. I do.
Yeah.
Teachers do that. That's a common thing. Like, I think that's the right thing. Everyone's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
And I think making space is important. You don't know what they're going to say or how to react, but I just think that balance is really important.
Yes. Give space. If you're someone that normally takes space, try to give space. If you're someone that normally gives space, try to take space. There are people who are really good listeners, and I hate to say it, but if you're on a podcast, being a good listener doesn't mean shit if you're the guest, okay?
And I'll say this too, about picking guests. I've mentioned it before, but when I worked for an NPR affiliate, we would pre-interview people to be to make sure that they were good talkers. There are some people that just aren't, and if you're just a friend, 2 friends trying to do it, maybe self-identify before you get started. If one of you tends to dominate the conversation, is that dynamic going to work for a podcast? I mean, there's some people that don't say much but are very funny when they do speak up, and that is a dynamic. But just think about that dynamic, how you give and take space.
Yes. Give and take. It's so important. Okay. If you want a bad example of giving and taking, listen to the Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. Okay.
You hate that show.
Listen, I like Conan. I love all the guests. I love the idea of the show, but Conan has no idea how to give space, right? Like,
that's his comedic styling.
Yeah. But it's also like, if you're on a late night show, you're on Conan. It's timed, it's planned out what segments are going to happen where and all this. The podcast is more free form, but there still is a time constraint, so he kind of goes overboard on like me where it's like he should really be giving space because he takes so much space naturally. He's also physically huge.
I mean, that's why he picked Pete Holmes to do a late night show. He's like, I gotta have someone bigger than me on air.
So yeah, Conan O'Brien wouldn't even fit in the studio if you're wondering how big that guy is.
So, okay.
Tip number 11?
10 point.
Yeah.
10B, 10A, whatever we want to do. Test your podcast.
Yeah.
Like, if you have an idea, you've thought about the niche, the structure, the dynamic between the guests, clips, all that other stuff, it's still worthwhile, especially if you're going to come to a place like this.
Yeah.
Bake in a test or two to make sure what you have up here works on here. And if you're listening only, I pointed at my head and then I pointed at the microphone.
Yeah.
But it's so important. And there are certain shows that had incredible backlogs. We talk about it all the time. But for some of them, we've learned that it's been valuable for them to try and figure stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And we've even told people, including Matt Hansel, Common Enemies, just sit down somewhere with a friend, record on your phone, see how you feel in the dynamic before coming in. We don't, honestly, if you put an episode out, don't put an episode recording here. Not a huge deal. We'd much rather you put it out, but it's like, ultimately it's your prerogative.
Right.
But if you're strapped for cash or you're thinking about making an investment in your own equipment, it's worthwhile making sure that you have something at least worth investing in, money or time, before you start to invest large portions of money or time.
Yep. And it also goes into finding co-hosts, finding guest type stuff, you know, like there's nothing wrong with like running 2 or 3 test podcasts. You know, you can, like, there's no one is forcing you to put out a podcast. So if you and your friend want to start a podcast and you're figuring out the format, you can meet up once a week at a certain time. Be like, this is the recording time, and then do a couple dummy podcasts, like you said, record on your phone, and just feel it out and be like, oh, how did that feel? Like, was the time too long? Is our topic too hard to talk about? Like, or are we straying off this topic too much? We would rather talk about something else. Give it the time to like grow and be flexible, especially because but when you put something out, you're going to be married to the name and the branding and the imagery. So just make sure you kind of have a good plan before you launch.
And that is 10 or 11 tips.
That's 10 tips and a small drink and fries
on podcasting with friends. And
nice.
Look at that. Ready? Yeah.
We did it.
We did it. Okay. So
and we're also keeping... we also keep very good track of time here, and we're probably got about 5 to 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So let's talk. We just talked. Let's lessons learned. Lessons learned. Tech tips. Highlights.
Lessons learned. Let's see. Do I have any big ones for this week? Do you have one in mind?
The only thing that really comes to mind right away, and this is like the diary section of this business, it's patience.
Yeah.
And then there's lessons learned to be a bit more patient. We've had clients that have kind of disappeared that have started to come back. There's a balance to it. I mean, when you're financially tied to something, it's harder to be patient than you need to be at times. But it's also with patience becomes a balance. If you're too patient, you will forget to pivot in times that you need to grow.
Yeah. And
so I think I'm learning I'm reminding myself to be patient, but also not getting, letting that patience get in the way of having to pivot. Like, have something, have something to focus on while you're being patient.
Yeah.
So it's like, you don't need to sit in your patience, although that probably is smart and healthy to do. But I think that's really a lesson that I've been learning, especially with like some bigger podcasts. Things what's meant to be will come around.
Yep.
But also don't be too lackadaisical and just be like, things are going to work out when there's still stuff to be doing.
It's like watering a plant. Okay. You get a tiny plant, you water it every week or however often you water them.
Oh,
just because you watered it doesn't mean it's going to be a big plant tomorrow. So
I have a story, a very quick story about plants. My mom gave me an ivy when I first moved to New York in 2019. And I said, I always killed plants. Not intentionally. I'm not like a plant killer, but she gave me this plant and I said, my dreams of New York are alive as long as this plant is alive. I'm like, I got to take care of myself. It's a metaphor. And then the pandemic hit and I left and I came back to New York to move out and my plant was dead. And I said, my time here is over.
Back to New Hampshire, baby.
Yes.
Okay, so my lessons learned is also kind of I'm going to fuse it with my tech tip because I think there's something to be gained from here. So I'm a big fan of the Adobe Premiere transcribe feature.
Yeah.
And so every week I put out the podcast and then I make a clip, right? And sometime later that week. Yeah, don't quit your day job. And I remembered I had an episode where someone said something really great and I really loved what they said. And I could not for the life of me find it in the podcast. I watched the whole thing, like everywhere. I couldn't find it. And so I got frustrated. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put it into the Adobe Premiere clip file that I normally have, put the whole episode in there. And I'm just going to transcribe it. And then you can search in the transcription feature. And I remember they said one specific word that they didn't say the rest of the podcast. Turned out the clip was literally like the last like 2 minutes.
Oh, so, yeah. So you're like, I'm done searching. And then it was in the part you didn't search.
Exactly. So I would say if you have a moment where you remember someone said something, you've got a longer podcast, you're like, I really want to make a clip out of this, but like I forgot to mark what time it happened, or I'm not really sure, but you can remember like they said a couple things in a row. Try the transcribe feature. Transcribe is also great for making the subtitles on the clip. Very powerful tool, but for finding a location in a longer video or longer podcast, very helpful.
So that's the tech tip as well?
Yeah.
Great. I think I'm just going to add to yours another feature. If you're doing, you don't have the Creative Cloud, you can use Descript. I think it gives you 3 hours
Descript
of free,
is a really popular one.
3 hours of transcriptions. And so you can find stuff that way. That's a really great tool. My tech tip is, and I alluded to it before, get a mixer or whatever you record on. Make sure it has a way to gauge your levels. Because when you said the headphone level does not match the gain level, I was like, that is absolutely correct. The Zoom H6, the reason I bought that versus the H4 is because it had those levels on there.
Yeah.
And I would do these things called tape syncs where like the BBC or NPR would send me to record remotely with a prominent person on the subject. And they would wear headphones for a phone call. And then some people request to still wear headphones to hear themselves. But I don't necessarily know. I mean, I guess I can listen to the person recording, but sometimes you can be misled.
Yeah.
But having with the H6, just that red, yellow, green.
Yeah.
Is so helpful. And then on our equipment now, we record through a mixer that's an interface onto Audition, and you can see those levels.
How big it is. Yeah.
You can see how big it is, and it also has the colors there too. If you're foregoing headphones, that is the most useful tool that you can have because it's showing you exactly how healthy your audio levels are.
So you want to be about -12 dB, but actually
literally 12 to -6-ish. Yeah, just in that range.
Literally when I was leaving to come here today, my wife was doing her podcast and they're using my old Zoom H6, right? And she was audio checking their levels and she's like, I feel like a little bit loud. You guys are a little bit quiet. And I was like, I told him straight up, it's like, whatever your normal conversation voice is fine. But here's the deal. It's better to be a little too quiet than it is to be too loud, especially when it comes to audio, photography, all these mediums, right? Because when you're a little too quiet on the recording, let's say you're coming in at -16, you can still bump yourself up to a level that sounds good. And, I mean, if you have to bump yourself too much, you're going to introduce noise, it's going to be a problem. But if you're mostly in the same range, you don't have to be identically level because it'll get boosted up later. But if you're too loud, you're losing audio quality, period.
That you can't get back.
You can't get back. So, yeah.
Tech tip.
Okay, highlights.
Highlights, yes.
I got my first Patreon subscriber.
Yeah.
And at first, before we had any, I was like, man, we promised these people we'd watch a whole movie and review it, and I'm like, I'm busy. I don't know if I got time for this. I'm gonna need a couple Patreon subscribers to justify my time spent. So I don't really. I was kind of putting it off, and then we got the first subscriber, and I was like, hell yeah, let's do this episode. Let's get this Patreon episode out. So, actually first Patreon subscriber ever because I've never launched a Patreon.
Yeah,
it was very easy to set up, and I'm very excited about it because I just made this much money
minus tax and whatever the fees are.
Yeah, I made this much money. But yeah, so first Patreon subscriber, very very cool. Hoping to get more, and I'm hoping that the Patreon because we have a lot of great ideas for bonus episodes. So I'm hoping that the Patreon and the show can kind of guide the future of the podcast as well. So
that's sweet. Yeah, I'm trying to think of highlights. It's pretty cool.
New setup.
The new setup. We talked about it last time.
We
that was
did.
Cool. I mean, it's been less than a week recording Monday, Friday.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think we had we didn't talk about it last time. We had a pretty great guest come in terms of the comedy world.
Mhm.
I think I handled myself pretty well.
Yeah, pretty well. No food on the floor.
No food. No. I think it was more of like, I knew I'd recognize his face and everything right away, but I didn't piece it together just because we have so many people coming in and out. And I was like, oh no, you're like a big deal.
Yeah.
When it comes out, definitely check out the Worthless Clowns episode with Shane Torres.
Yeah.
But he was here and he was like, I'm looking to record. So there's people will say things. What I've learned is you're going to hear nice things when people are here about the space. You're not going to hear the bad things. So who knows? But it was just cool, really cool to meet someone who's much further ahead in comedy, but also someone at his stature be like, yeah, I'd consider recording here for a few episodes.
Yeah.
You don't know. So it's nice to see us growing to reach people who are at higher levels than us.
Yes.
I think that was very rewarding. And then your wife, Lee, was on a podcast on Wednesday. That was just, was the International Lounge. Andres and Andrew record a few podcasts here. We talked about them finding these videos and podcasts helpful, but they just had a fun time. They're really enthusiastic. And I overheard them say, we are allowing them to create a podcast that they've been talking about for years. Yeah. Which is just like, that's kind of what it's about. And it was just fun. I don't know if Lee I assume Lee enjoyed herself.
Great time.
Lots of gifts, free food. And it was fun.
Back to the apartment and had a gift of my favorite canned herbal tea that they had given her, which was dope. Wang Lao Jia. Amazing. So good.
So it was just like, I don't know. It was a fun time recording, meeting cool people, seeing people that we've worked with for a while, still enjoying the space. But nothing major.
Those are all good things. You know, it's nice to have people come to the space and have a good time.
That's really it. And
that's what it boils down to. Profits. Who fucking cares, man? We're having a good time.
I mean, that's really what sustains a business. But
nah, what sustained a business is unpaid labor.
Cash.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. Next week, we'll have 52 tips on how to improve your audio quality.
No, we'll see. Find us, email us at myfriendsbasementstudio@gmail.com.
Send your questions.
Questions. If you want to record here and you're in Bushwick, or we do remote recordings.
We do remote recordings too.
Find us on Instagram at myfriendsbasementstudio. It's the same on other platforms. Instagram's our main one. Our website is myfriendsbasement.studio. Definitely leave stuff in the comments. And at some point, not right here, but earlier, we'll probably have put in our ad for our affiliate link.
Yeah, we'll have our affiliate link ad. Very good. So buy a candle.
Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And hopefully you found these tips helpful.
If not, drop a comment.
Tell us how bad.
Tell us how bad this is. All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Bye.
Bye.